Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening a file on a figure who I think really defines the idea of the hidden genius. We're talking about Austrian composer Franz Schubert, and I want to start with a statistic from the research that just, honestly, it didn't compute for me. I had to read it like 3 times to make sure it wasn't a typo.
I have a feeling I know exactly which number you're looking at. It sort of jumps off the page, doesn't it?
It has to be the timeline versus the output. This man died at the age of 31.
31?
31 years old. I'm looking back at what I had accomplished by 31, paying off some student loans, maybe figuring out how to cook something other than pasta, and let's just say the comparison is unkind.
Right.
But Schubert, by the time he died at 31, he had left behind a vast oeuvre. That's the term that historians use, of over 1,500 works.
It is staggering. It's a density of creativity that is almost unique in human history. To put that 1,500 number in perspective for you,
do.
that includes over 600 Lieder, which are, German art songs, 7 complete symphonies, operas, masses, and just a literal mountain of chamber music.
It feels like he was living on a completely different clock than the rest of us.
Yeah.
Like his day had 48 hours or something.
Well, in a way, he was living on a different clock because he was running out of time, even if he didn't really know it at first. But historically, you have to place him correctly.
Okay.
Schubert's life, from 1797 to 1828, it sits right on this tectonic shift in music history. He is the ultimate bridge figure.
A bridge figure.
He stands with one foot in the late classical era, the structured, elegant world of Haydn and Mozart, and the other foot is firmly stepping into the emotional, turbulent waters of the early Romantic era.
But here's the paradox that really hooks me. Despite this massive output, 1,500 works, he wasn't a celebrity, right? He wasn't the Taylor Swift or the Beyonce of 1820s Vienna.
Not even close, no.
Yeah.
If you look at the celebrity composers of that time, you're looking at giants like Beethoven or Rossini.
Right.
They were the ones selling out theaters and having their names shouted in the streets. Schubert was, he was almost invisible to the general public.
Invisible.
His appreciation was limited to a very tight, small circle of friends in Vienna. He wasn't selling out concert halls. He was playing in living rooms.
It's actually kind of tragic, but it also sets up this incredible posthumous treasure hunt story, which I know we'll get to.
Oh, absolutely.
I was reading about how some of his biggest works, absolute masterpieces like the Great C Major Symphony, were just sitting in dusty cabinets for years after he died.
Exactly. And that's really the mission of this deep dive. We want to move beyond the 1 or 2 pieces everyone knows, like Ave Maria.
Which is beautiful, but it's not the whole story.
Not at all. We need to understand the man, this guy nicknamed Little Mushroom. We need to explore the tragedy of his unfinished works, the mystery of his health, and why Beethoven, who was the titan, arguably the hardest man to impress in the history of mankind,
You're not wrong.
said on his deathbed, truly, the spark of divine genius resides in this Schubert.
If Beethoven says that about you, you've made it. So let's unpack this. Let's go back to the source. Where does a talent like this even come from? Was he born into a dynasty of musicians like the Bach family?
Not exactly a dynasty, no, but it was a musical household. He was born in the Himmelpfortgrund.
Which is just a great name for a suburb.
It means gate of heaven. It was a suburb of Vienna. He was the 12th child of a schoolmaster.
The 12th child. That is a very, very crowded house.
Extremely crowded, though tragically, it was common for 9 of his siblings died in infancy.
Whoa.
So death was just present in the household from the very start. His father, Franz Theodor, was a schoolmaster, and he started teaching Franz the violin at age 5. His brother Ignaz taught him piano.
Okay, so a normal musical upbringing so far.
For a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But here is the first aha moment in the Schubert story. It's what I call the unteachable paradox.
The unteachable moment, usually that means a student is bad.
In this case, it meant the exact opposite. It's the classic prodigy problem. His brother Ignaz later admitted that he was just amazed because only a few months after they started lessons, Franz told him he had no need of further instruction.
Can you imagine the scene? Your little brother looks at you and says, "Thanks, bro. I'm good. I've already surpassed you."
It was humbling for Ignaz, for sure. He actually said Franz had completely distanced and outstripped him. And it wasn't just his family.
Oh, this continues.
They sent him to the local organist, a man named Michael Holzer, for lessons. Holzer ended up crying with admiration. He said he didn't really teach Franz anything. He just looked on with astonishment and silence.
That is a recurring theme here, isn't it? The people who are supposed to be teaching him are just stepping back and watching him go. It's like trying to teach a bird how to fly when it's already soaring.
A perfect analogy.
But Obviously, a talent like that gets noticed eventually. He ends up at the Imperial Seminary, right? The Stadtkonvikt.
Yes, at age 11, he gets a choir scholarship. And this is crucial because it exposes him to the greats. He's playing the music of Haydn, Mozart, and of course Beethoven every single day. And he catches the eye of Antonio Salieri.
Salieri. Now, I have to pause here. Anyone who has seen the movie Amadeus creates this mental image of Salieri as this villain, the man who hated Mozart.
Right.
But here, the narrative is totally different.
Completely different. That movie is great drama, but it's terrible history.
Yeah.
In reality, Salieri was Vienna's leading musical authority, a highly respected teacher.
Yeah.
And he recognized Schubert's talent immediately.
So he took him under his wing.
He taught him privately for years, focusing on theory and composition. But what I love about this period is the irony. Here is Schubert, this young student leading the school orchestra, composing his first symphony, Symphony No. 1, D82, while he's still just a kid in a school uniform.
He's doing homework, dodging bullies, and writing symphonies, but then reality hits. And this is the part of the story that feels so relatable to anyone trying to be an artist today. You leave school, and you have to get a job. And for Schubert, that meant returning to his father's school to teach.
The starving artist reality, but worse, it was the drudging artist. He spent 2 years teaching the youngest pupils. He described it as severe drudgery.
I can only imagine. You have this divine music in your head, you're thinking about orchestration and harmony, and then you have to go teach the ABCs to a room full of 6-year-olds who probably just want to run around and scream.
Yeah, he was miserable.
Yes, a bit.
He was famously short-tempered with the kids. But this is where we see the double life of Franz Schubert. This is the key to his productivity.
A double life.
While he was miserable in the classroom during the day, his creative output was exploding at night. Let's just look at the year 1815.
This year is statistically insane. I have the numbers right here.
It is arguably the most prolific year of his entire life. He's 18 years old, working a full-time job he absolutely hates.
And yet
in 1815 alone, he writes over 20,000 bars of music.
20,000 bars.
That includes 9 church works, a symphony, and roughly 140 lieder.
140 songs in 1 year. That's one every 2 or 3 days while working a day job.
Exactly. He would finish a lesson, rush to his desk, and just pour music onto the page. It's almost unbelievable.
And amidst all this work, there was also heartbreak, right? We have to mention Therese Grob.
We do. She was a soprano, a neighbor, and Schubert wrote several liturgical works specifically for her voice. He wanted to marry her.
But he couldn't.
No. And this tells you a lot about the rigid society he lived in. There was a strict marriage consent law in 1815 Vienna.
What did that entail?
It required a bridegroom to prove he had the financial means to support a family. Schubert, being a lowly school teacher with no real assets and a volatile income, he just couldn't meet the requirement.
That is heartbreaking. Bureaucracy literally stopping love. Show us your bank account or you can't get married.
Essentially, yes. So he's miserable at work. He can't marry the girl he loves because he's poor. The pressure is building. Something has to give.
And it does in 1816. A friend comes to the rescue.
Franz Schubert. He was a charismatic, sort of wealthy friend. And he essentially says to Schubert, "Stop this. Quit. Come live with me. Just write music."
The ultimate I quit moment. And so he shifts into this bohemian lifestyle. There's this quote from him during this time that I love. "I compose every morning, and when one piece is done, I begin another."
That was his process. He was a machine, but he was a machine that ran on friendship. This is where we get to the core of Schubert's adult life. He didn't have a wealthy patron like the old composers. He didn't have a Prince Esterhazy paying his bills. He had a circle.
The bros, if you will, but very cultured bros.
Indeed. You had Johann Michael Vogel, who was a prominent baritone. He was older, about 20 years Schubert's senior, but he recognized the genius in Schubert's songs and became his champion, performing them in public.
Okay, so Vogel was his voice to the world.
In a way, yes. Then you had Josef von Spahn, who had supported him financially since the school days, and Johann Mayr-Hofer, the poet.
And these friends didn't just hang out. They built their entire social lives around his music. They literally called their parties Schubertiads.
Which is quite the honor. Imagine having parties named after you. And these weren't formal concerts, you know.
Right, no tickets, no ushers.
No, they were gatherings in private homes, like the Gundelhof. They would crowd into a living room, smoke pipes, drink, and just dedicate the entire evening to listening to Schubert's newest music.
But it wasn't all serious, quiet listening, was it? I saw something in the notes about the nonsense society.
The Unsinnsgesellschaft, yes. Schubert was an active member. They would publish these satirical newsletters, play pranks, make fun of the establishment.
I love that.
There's a famous caricature of Schubert from this time playing with a Draisine, which was an early prototype of the bicycle. Just him goofing around with his friends.
That really humanizes him, because when you see the painted portraits, he looks very serious, very stiff with the high collar. But then you hear about his nickname, Schummerl.
Little Mushroom, or Tubby. He was very short, only about 1.52 meters, which is barely 5 feet tall.
5 feet tall.
Okay, Little Mushroom makes perfect sense now.
He was round, he wore glasses, and he was often disheveled. And he definitely enjoyed the nightlife. There are plenty of references to heavy drinking and social fun. He wasn't some recluse in an ivory tower.
Right.
However, this bohemian life wasn't without its dangers. We have to talk about the incident in 1820.
The brush with the law. It surprised me. You think of classical composers as part of the establishment, wearing wigs and bowing to kings. But Schubert got raided.
Vienna in 1820 was a police state. We have to remember the context here. The Napoleonic Wars had ended, and the Austrian authorities, led by Metternich, were terrified of French revolutionary sentiments coming back.
So they were cracking down.
On everything. They were deeply suspicious of any gathering of students or young artists. So one night, the police raided one of these gatherings where Schubert was present.
And Schubert was arrested. He was detained along with 4 friends. One of them, a poet named Johann Senn, was actually imprisoned for over a year and then banished from Vienna.
Wow, just for being at a party?
Pretty much. Schubert got off lightly, but he was severely reprimanded. And the police report is fascinating. It says Schubert used insulting and opprobrious language against the officials.
Schubert mouthing off to the cops. Insulting and opprobrious. I love that detail. It shows he had a temper.
It adds a layer of tension to his life. And this context of surveillance, it explains why his audience remained so insular. You couldn't just advertise big public gatherings if you were associated with revolutionary youth.
So it forced his music underground, in a way.
It kept his music private, hidden in these safe houses, which ultimately hurt his career but probably deepened his friendships.
So his environment shaped his career. But let's pivot to the music itself. We keep saying he wrote 600 Lieder. Why is that so significant? People wrote songs before Schubert. Mozart wrote songs. Beethoven wrote songs.
They did, but the approach was completely different. Before Schubert, the Lied, the German art song, was generally simple and strophic.
Strophic meaning?
That means verse, chorus, using the exact same music for each verse of the poem. It was folk-like. Schubert turned them into psychological dramas.
How so? Give us an example.
He made the piano an equal partner in the storytelling. It wasn't just background chords. Take Gretchen am Spinnrad, Gretchen at the spinning wheel, which he wrote when he was just 17.
17. Okay, the text is from Goethe's Faust, right?
Exactly. Gretchen is spinning wool and thinking about her lover, Faust, and she's getting more and more agitated.
And the piano?
The piano part. The right hand plays this continuous, circling, undulating figure. It perfectly mimics the mechanical motion of the spinning wheel and the treadle.
So it's literal.
It's literal, but it also mimics her racing thoughts, her anxiety. And there was this moment where she remembers his kiss, and the music just stops. The wheel stops.
Because she's so overcome with emotion, she stops pedaling.
Precisely. And then you hear this clunk, clunk in the piano as she struggles to get the heavy wheel moving again. It is cinematic. It's like the soundtrack is reacting to the character's physiology.
That is incredibly sophisticated for a teenager to write.
Or look at Ilkenek, the Elf King. There's a horror story in a song. A father is riding on horseback through the night, holding his sick child. The child sees the Elf King coming to take him, but the father only sees fog.
And the piano here, what's it doing?
The piano plays these rapid, relentless triplets in the right hand. It represents the furious gallop of the horse. It is physically exhausting for the pianist to play. It creates this sense of breathless terror from the first second.
Wow.
And Schubert, the singer, has to portray 4 different characters. The narrator, the worried father, the terrified child, and the seductive, creepy Elf King.
It's a one-man opera in 4 minutes.
Exactly. And then there's Winterreise, the winter journey.
This is often cited as the dark heart of his work.
It is the absolute pinnacle of the genre. It's a cycle of 24 songs about a wanderer in a bleak, frozen landscape who has been rejected by his love.
Yeah.
But it's not just about a breakup.
It's deeper than that.
It's about existential isolation. The Wiener Theaterzeitung wrote that none can sing or hear without being deeply moved. It was a heavy emotional experience. He finished it while he was dying.
So he wasn't just writing catchy tunes, he was exploring the human psyche. But he wasn't just a songwriter. We have to talk about his instrumental stuff. There's this famous phrase Robert Schumann used to describe Schubert's Great C Major Symphony, heavenly lengths.
Yes, and that highlights a key difference between Schubert and someone like Beethoven. Beethoven is all about harmonic, drama, tension, release, struggle. He grabs you by the collar.
He's very direct.
Very.
Yeah.
Schubert is about melodic development. He lets themes wander and evolve. He's not in a rush to get to the destination.
Heavenly lengths sounds like a polite way of saying it's really long, but Schumann meant it as a compliment, right?
Oh, absolutely. It means it's immersive. You get lost in it. It creates a world. And he was incredibly innovative with instruments. Think about the trap quintet.
Okay.
A standard piano quintet is a piano and a string quartet.
Yeah.
2 violins, viola, cello. Schubert swaps 1 violin for a double bass.
Which gives it that deep, rich bottom end.
It changes the whole texture. It's looser, more open, more rustic.
Yeah.
And then there's the Arpeggione Sonata. He wrote a masterpiece for an instrument. The arpeggione was a trendy invention at the time.
The arpeggione.
It was basically a mix of a guitar and a cello, fretted and bowed.
It's like writing a concerto for the keytar in the 1980s.
In a way. The instrument went extinct almost immediately, but the music was so good that now cellists or violists play it.
He backed the wrong horse, instrumentally.
He did. But we also have to mention his harmonic daring. In the string quintet in C major, which is just a staggering piece of music, the second movement moves from E major to F minor.
For those of us who aren't music theory experts, what does that feel like to listen to?
E major is bright, warm, stable. F minor is dark, distant, incredibly tense. To just jump between them like that is shocking. It creates this otherworldly emotional shift, like the ground suddenly dropping out from under you.
So we have this genius output, but we also have a lot of loose ends. The most famous one being, of course, the unfinished symphony. Why is it unfinished?
That is the great mystery. Symphony number 8. He wrote 2 absolutely perfect movements in 1822, sketched a third, and then just stopped.
Did he run out of ideas? Did he get bored?
Neither seems likely. The first 2 movements are masterpieces. But he never mentioned it to his friends. You just put it aside.
Any theories?
There are a few. Some suggest he associated the piece with the onset of his illness.
Yeah.
A bad memory. Or maybe he felt he couldn't possibly write a finale that could match the quality of the first 2 movements. The wildest part is that it wasn't performed until decades after his death. It was just sitting in a drawer somewhere.
It fits the pattern of his life work created, then hidden away. But he did try to get his work out there, specifically operas. He really wanted to be a stage composer.
He tried so hard. He wrote about 20 stage projects. Almost all of them failed.
Why? If his music was so good.
A combination of bad luck, bad librettos, the scripts, and just terrible timing. For his big opera Furibras, it was rejected largely because Vienna was completely obsessed with Rossini at the time.
The Italian composer.
Right. German opera was out, Italian opera was in, it was a fashion issue, trends kill art.
And censorship was a problem too, right?
Absolutely. His opera, The Conspirators, was banned by the censors simply because of the title, politics again. And then there's Rosamund Schubert, wrote incredible incidental music for this play. But the play itself, the script by Helmina von Tesi, was reportedly so bad, so boring.
That no one cared.
The show was canceled after 2 nights.
That is tragic. The soundtrack was amazing, but the movie sucked, so nobody ever heard the soundtrack.
That's a perfect modern analogy. It took Schubert's beautiful music down with the sinking ship of the play.
It really seems like he couldn't catch a break professionally, and all this time he's living in the same city as Beethoven. Did they ever hang out?
Rarely. They moved in different circles. Beethoven was the established, grumpy, eccentric genius. Schubert was the shy bohemian. But the connection between them is so powerful.
How so?
On Beethoven's deathbed in 1827, he was finally shown some of Schubert's scores, and that's when he made that famous quote.
Truly, the spark of divine genius resides in this Schubert.
Can you imagine what that must have meant to Schubert? And then, a few weeks later, Schubert actually served as a torchbearer at Beethoven's funeral.
A literal passing of the torch.
It was symbolic, wasn't it? The tragedy is that Schubert didn't live long enough to carry it very far.
Before we get to the end of his life, I do want to touch on a modern debate that came up in the research. There's been a lot of discussion about Schubert's sexuality.
Yes, this is a major topic in modern Schubert scholarship. It really started in earnest around 1989 when a musicologist named Maynard Solomon published an article suggesting Schubert was attracted to men.
And this caused a huge stir in the classical music world.
A huge stir. It challenged the traditional, Biedermeier view of Schubert as this sexless, chubby cherub. Then you had other scholars, like Rita Steblin, countering that argument, saying he was chasing women like the Countess Caroline Esterhazy and Therese Grob.
It sounds like historians reading between the lines of old letters and diaries, trying to decipher code.
It is exactly that. Whether his intense friendships were homosocial, which was very common and even encouraged in the 19th century, or if they were actually erotic, is hard to prove definitively.
So what's the takeaway?
The key takeaway for us isn't necessarily who he slept with. It's that his emotional life was absolutely fueled by these deep, intense connections with his male friends. That's where his support system lay. That love, whatever form it took, is what you hear in the music.
Okay, let's move to the final years, because things start to go downhill pretty fast around 1823.
That is when the first symptoms of syphilis appeared.
And in the 1820s, that was a terrifying diagnosis.
It was a death sentence, but a slow and often agonizing one. There was no cure. The treatment was often mercury, which is, a poison in itself.
And this changed his music.
It absolutely did. It became deeper, more personal, much darker. You can hear the shadow of death approaching in the later works. But, and here's that Schubert paradox again, as his physical health declined, his creativity spiked.
We arrive at 1828, the final year.
The miraculous year. It rivals 1815. In his last year, suffering from illness, likely in constant pain, he writes the Great C Major Symphony, the Mass in E-flat, and the String Quintet in C Major, which many consider the greatest piece of chamber music ever written.
It's like he knew the clock was running out and he just had to get it all onto the page.
That's what it feels like.
And he finally got a concert, right? A real one.
Yes, in March of 1828. The only time in his entire career he gave a public concert entirely of his own works. And it was a success. He made money. He bought a new piano.
Finally. A win.
But fate is cruel. It was overshadowed almost immediately because the great virtuoso violinist Paganini arrived in Vienna shortly after.
Paganini, the guy who supposedly sold his soul to the devil to play the violin.
He was the flashy rock star with all the pyrotechnics. Schubert was the introspective songwriter. The press and the public chased Paganini, and Schubert just couldn't hold the spotlight.
Then in November of 1828, the end comes. He falls gravely ill.
He'd moved in with his brother Ferdinand. He started suffering from terrible headaches, vomiting, swollen joints. He couldn't keep any food down.
There's a touching story about music in his final days, though.
There is. 5 days before he died, his friends came to the apartment and played Beethoven's String Quartet No. 14 for him. It's a dense, difficult, beautiful piece of music. His friend Karl Holtz later wrote, "The King of Harmony has sent the King of Song a friendly bidding to the crossing."
That gives me chills. The King of Song, and then he died November 19th, 1828, at 31. What was the actual cause of death?
Officially, the death certificate said typhoid fever. But that's been debated for years. Some say it was tertiary syphilis. Others say it was actually mercury poisoning from the treatment for syphilis.
I read something about him walking 42 miles shortly before he died. Does that fit?
Yes, in October, shortly before his final collapse, he walked about 68 kilometers, that's 42 miles, in 3 days to visit Haydn's grave.
Which would be pretty hard to do if you had advanced syphilis affecting your muscles or your bones.
Exactly. That level of physical exertion suggests his mobility was fine. The intense vomiting and the rapid decline at the end, that points more toward typhoid or maybe salmonella from contaminated food or water. We may never know for sure.
And he was buried.
At his own request, he was buried near Beethoven in the Waring Cemetery.
And later moved.
Yes, in 1888, both he and Beethoven were exhumed and moved to the Central Cemetery, the Zentralfriedhof, to lie alongside Brahms and Strauss in the musician's corner. And there's a truly macabre detail here involving the composer Anton Bruckner.
Oh, I saw this. Bruckner was a huge Schubert fan, right?
Obsessive. During the exhumation, Bruckner was present. He actually reached into the coffins and held the skulls of both Schubert and Beethoven in his hands.
That is intense. Talk about venerating your heroes, literally holding their heads.
It just shows the reverence they were held in by that point. To Bruckner, these weren't men.
Yeah.
They were saints.
So Schubert dies. But in a way, his career was just starting. This is the buried treasure part of the story, which is just wild to me.
He really is. At his death, only about 100 opus numbers were published. The vast majority of those 1,500 works were unpublished. His family had cabinets full of manuscripts. They just called them the files.
And then Robert Schumann shows up, like the Indiana Jones of musicology.
In 1838, 10 years after Schubert's death, Schumann visits Vienna. He meets Schubert's brother, Ferdinand. Ferdinand shows him the pile. Schumann starts digging through these papers, and he finds the manuscript for the Great C Major Symphony.
He must have lost his mind.
He was stunned. He realized the world has never heard this masterpiece. He takes it to Felix Mendelssohn in Leipzig, and they perform it for the first time.
Can you imagine being the person to discover a symphony 10 years after the composer's death? And it didn't even stop there.
No. In 1867, George Grove, of the famous Grove Dictionary, and Arthur Sullivan, of Gilbert and Sullivan fame, went on a trip to Vienna. They literally went digging in closets and dusty boxes. They found missing symphonies, the Rosamund music, operas.
It's incredible that so much of what we now consider the canon of classical music was just sitting in a drawer, one spring cleaning away from being thrown in the trash.
It changes how you view history. If those drawers had been thrown out, music history would be fundamentally different. We wouldn't have the bridge between Beethoven and Brahms.
Now I want to talk about his epitaph. It was written by the poet Franz Schubert. It reads, "The art of music has here interred a precious treasure, but yet far fairer hopes."
It's a beautiful sentiment, acknowledging the tragedy of his early death, but it became surprisingly controversial among musicians.
Oh, so it sounds complimentary.
Well, the phrase fairer hopes implies he was incomplete, that we lost what he would have become. Musicians like the great pianist Radu Lupu agree. They feel the tragedy of the lost future.
But not everyone sees it that way.
No. Others, like Andras Schiff and even Robert Schumann himself, disagreed. They argue he lived a concentrated life.
That he did enough.
Exactly. Schumann said he did enough, and Schiff compares him to Mozart. You can't speculate on what they would have done. You have to appreciate the perfection of what they did do. He fully realized his genius, just in a much shorter time frame.
It's a hard question, because 31 is so young. But 1,500 works is a lifetime achievement for anybody else.
It is. He created the modern song as we know it. He influenced everyone from Brahms to Mahler. You could even argue his melodic sense influenced the Beatles.
Before we wrap up, there's one final thought I want to leave our listeners with, and this is the one that really sticks with me from all the research. It's about his mindset at the very, very end.
I think I know what you're going to say, the lessons.
Yes. Weeks before he died, literally in the last weeks of his life, November 1828, Franz Schubert signed up for lessons.
Counterpoint lessons. He went to Simon Sector, who was a famous theorist at the time.
Think about this. He had written the Great C Major Symphony. He had written Winterreise. He was a master. He was being called a genius by Beethoven. And yet, he felt he needed to learn more. He felt his counterpoint wasn't good enough. He was still a student.
He was still trying to evolve. He didn't think he was done.
So here is the question for you, listening right now. If the Unfinished Symphony and Winterreise were created by a man barely in his 30s who thought he still had more to learn, what would the history of music look like if he had lived to be 50? What did we lose in that gap?
It's the greatest what if in music history.
A genius who never stopped being a student. Keep diving deep, everyone. We'll see you next time.